YouTube channel of the Dynamics Research on Urban Morphology channel. I will provide the link of the live streaming in a few seconds. Thank you so much, Tolga Ünlü, for being with us today. Tolga Ünlü, who is a PhD candidate and research assistant at the Faculty of Architecture and Design of Uzgi University, is going to introduce Tolga.
Yeah.
Is there a problem with the sound?
Oh, sorry. Yes, there is. Sorry, to make wait. Okay. You're welcome, Professor Ünlü. Tolga Ünlü has been a member of the Department of City and Regional Planning at Çukurova University, Adana, Turkey, since 2020. Before then, he took many responsibilities at the Department of City and Regional Planning at Mersin University between 2006 and 2020. And after taking bachelor, graduate, and PhD degrees at the Department of City and Regional Planning in Middle East Technical University. His research is focused on urban morphology, urban design, and planning practice, with a particular attention on urban growth and development of fringe belts, and on the relationship between research and practice in urban morphology and planning. Had articles and book chapters on physical development and planning history of Turkish cities, as well as their morphological transformation. He had a founding role in inauguration of Turkish Network on Urban Morphology in 2014. Besides having a position of professorship at Çukurova University, Turkey, in the field of urban morphology and planning, Tolga Ünlü has been a colleague in both urban morphology research groups since 2012 and international seminar on urban form since 2009. He has been undertaking the role of Secretary General at ISUF since 2021. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Özge. And Alessandro, thank you very much. I would like to say hello to everybody, and I would like to ask you to accept my apologies because of this delay in the presentation, because of the traffic conditions in Adana, which is very unexpected after the heavy rain here. Now, I think we can start with sharing the screen. Okay. Yes, is it okay?
Yes, it is.
Okay, no problem. Yes. Today, I would like to talk about the relationship between research and practice in the making of urban form. And I will bring up some questions for discussion at the end of the presentation, and I think it will open up some further discussions in this presentation. Now, let me begin with some critics about some famous names from the 20th century, from the mid-20th century. For example, Jane Jacobs. What was she saying about the cities? She's saying that the cities began to be the places of dullness and regimentation and began to lose their vitality in the making of urban form. Kevin Lynch refers to ugliness of the cities, and he says that the Americans are aware of this ugliness. Christopher Alexander pays our attention to the city as a whole. The city behaves in part the whole relationship, and he says that the cities began to lose this part the whole relationship. Gordon Cullen, in another content in the United Kingdom, he also was saying that the cities began to be the places of dullness, soulless, and the cities began to be the uninteresting places. These critics appeared around 1960s, at the beginning of 1960s, and 20 years later we can see the same critics to the cities. For example, Trenchik was concentrated on his critiques about the isolated objects. He formulated the buildings as isolated objects, and he developed his critiques about the three-dimensionality of urban form. He was saying that we lost the relationship between buildings and spaces because of the increasing automobile ownership, the dominance of modernist architecture, urban renewal programs, lack of control over urban space by local authorities, and the spatial term lost space, which was developed by him. Tybalt, at the same time, approximately at the same time, probably a decade later, according to him, the cities are full of mediocre and poorly maintained buildings. And the cities became the places for making money. Like Hall, Tybalt and Hall are the same at the point that the cities begin to be the places of developing the economics of housing building with neglecting the design. Again, in the beginning of 1980s, Hedman and Jasinski, I like these critics much more than the others because this phrase, this paragraph gives us very much about discussing the relationship between research and practice. They were saying that everywhere cities find it difficult to secure coherent and satisfying patterns of development. They were saying that we can see very successful individual buildings, very attractive, very exciting individual buildings, but they are looking at the cumulative effect, the whole, the relationship, they are looking to the part-to-whole relationship, and the cumulative, they say that cumulative effect is disappointing. Because according to them, the part-to-whole relationship was lost. And the strong organizing patterns are missing. Here, according to my opinion, the problems can, I'm trying to simplify the problems about occurring these problems. The reasons behind these problems might be the fragmented city, about structuring the cities, structuring of the cities within the part-to-whole relationship, because we are focusing so much to the parts with neglecting the whole at a strategic level. The other reason might be big architecture. So many professionals are concentrated on designing and building very attractive buildings. Many professionals are trying to be famous architectures or famous something like that. They are so concentrated on their jobs, on their buildings, but what about the city? We must talk about this. On the other hand, I can say that I can call small-scale alliances within the plots, within urban space, among the actors on production of urban space. These are individual actions. The landowner, the house builder, the municipality, local government, etc., etc. They are all thinking in the same way. They are trying to make much more money from the city, from space. This results with a quantitative approach that they are trying to construct as much as they can. These reasons are all related to each other strongly, of course. And as a result, the fifth reason behind the mediocrity or losing the part-to-whole relationship is the use value. We all looking for the use value of the built environment. We are not looking for the use value. We are looking for the exchange value within the environment. It is not prioritized within production of built environment. And the same people, the same professionals, same guys provides us some visions about structuring the city and shaping of urban form. For example, Lynch draws our attention that the city is the product of many builders. It is in a process, ever-changing process. There is no final result. We must be aware of this, and we must define the continuous succession of phases in the production of built environment. Christopher Alexander, as many of us knows that, draws our attention to the part-to-whole relationship, and he says that the task of creating wholeness in the city can only be dealt with the process. Not the design alone cannot be the cure to make better results in the city. And Gordon Cullen draws our attention to the urban pattern rather than the individual buildings. He says he developed some concepts like serial vision, content, and place in order to reach the wholeness of the space within the wholeness within the relationship of parts and the coherency of that urban form. Yes, then we can reach 3 basic principles after the vision they put. For example, we must say that creating the wholeness in the city with a coherent urban pattern at all scales from the micro to macro. Creating the successful city is a process in which diverse people from different classes and groups take place with their diverse motivations, aims, preferences, and value judgments. And as a result, we should run within a framework for change. It's because, as Kevin Lynch says, we are in a continuous flux of change, and we must formulate this change also in the changing of built environment. And the 5 reasons: the fragmented city, big architecture, individual actions, quantitative approach, and concentrating on the exchange value brings us the city as image. And the city, if we began to look the city as image, we will begin to lose the human condition in the city, and the city began to be a place of alienation for all of us. Here, in this context, I think we must question the relationship between the practice and research. Here, yes, there's so much concentration on practice, I know. The planners, architects, urban designers are dealing within this sphere. They are dealing with what should be in the built environment. What should it be like? But it's, as I refer to 5 reasons for the downness of these cities, our cities, it's also a result of their motivations in the practice part. They are dealing with the shaping of urban form, organization of the structure, construction of relations. But on the other side, research asks questions rather than what should it be in the built environment. They are asking what is this? What is it in the built environment? Why did it occur and how did it occur? And we must ask all these questions in our research, what, why, and how questions, and we must refer it. If we are dealing with the practice and research, we must deal it with the behaviors of the planners, architects, and urban designers. In the domain of research, we are trying to investigate the reasons behind the emergence of the problems. And we are trying to develop our explanations for these circumstances. And the relationship and we can say that the relationship between practice and research changes according to their direction. For example, practice on the lower side of this diagram, we can see that practice influences research so much, while research has so little influence on practice. This is another problem here. We make so much research, but how can we relate it with the practice? Yes, when we talk about the practice, this relationship between practice and research, we can turn back again to the mid-20th century, and we can talk about the emergence of urban design, its roots by José Luis Sert. As you know, the first urban design conference was held by José Luis Sert in Harvard University in 1956, and Jane Jacobs, Kevin Lynch was there also. José Luis Sert was saying that although he was a member of CIAM, the Congress of Modernist International Congress of Modernist Architecture, he was a modernist, but he was beginning to criticize what modernism was doing in the cities. And he was saying that urban planning was too much concerned with the structure of the city, its growth processes, and the factors that shape the city. But what about the urban space? It was underestimated by urban planning. And on the other hand, architects are so much concentrated on buildings. But again, what about the city? In other words, planners were so much concentrated on the future of the city. Architects were so much concentrated on designing the buildings, but city is going somewhere else. And those critics of Kevin Lynch, Jane Jacobs, Tranchik, and the others emerged after these behaviors. Actually, today, we have the same critics. It means that we did not able to develop any coherent approach that the planners and the architects that might come together in order to produce some satisfying environments. Because, of course, and this is not a problem only for planners and architects. There are some politicians in the process and the other economics, etc., etc. This is mainly a problem of the system. I know, the capitalist system. But in this, although this system is very questionable, and it must change also, we can search some satisfying patterns in our cities in this system. Today, urban design is criticized by Cuthbert, for example, being so insubstantial. By Marshall, Stephen Marshall, he says that urban design has a lack of scientific ground. Sorkin also refers to lack of substantial theoretical debate. And apart from them, Marshall and Çalışkan, Stefan Marshall and Olga Çalışkan, says that there's some opportunity when we concentrate on urban design, when we see it, that it's a practice that deals with the physical organization of urban form elements. And Brenda shares that it can provide us a framework for change for the evolving urban space. And also Christopher Alexander says that we have a chance when we see it as a tool to create a coherent wholeness. But in this process, when we concentrate on the practitioners, architects tend to produce, as I said before, buildings like sculptures. They try to liberate themselves, while planners try to socialize and bureaucratize. Christopher Alexander again says that planners are so concentrated, focused on implementation of ordinance and rules, and architects are focused so much on individual buildings. As you say, the critics are reaching to the same points. Okay, if we are talking about architects and planners, we can say that both are mostly unaware of basic morphological concepts that have the potentiality to deepen their comprehension of the built environment. They also have little awareness about the intrinsic qualities of the urban built environment. In this context, they need research in order to develop their practice. I said here it is insensitive planning and architecture because they are neglecting the city. Both planners and architects are neglecting the city. They are focusing on piecemeal production of buildings or some parts of the cities. The problem is still the same as when we turn back to the emergence of urban design. What can urban morphology do, or how urban morphology can help to these problems? For that, let's look at what is urban morphology. In its general sense, it is the study of urban form, as Larkham and Jones says. Michael Konzen the son, says that it seeks to explain the layout and spatial composition of urban structures and urban spaces. Karl Krove says that it is a tool that allows the urban designers, or let's say architects and planners, to address urban form as a craft. Urban form as a craft. This is very important, I think. And the legendary Jeremy Whitehead says that urban morphology deals with the cyclical nature of urban growth. First. Second, it deals with the internal process of adaptation and redevelopment, what's going on inside the city. Third, it deals with the roles of various agents in the production of urban forms, questioning who is doing this. And later, in a later phase, fourth, urban morphology provides ideas for the future developments and the management of urban landscape or built environment. Here, in this explanation, Jeremy Whitehead puts the relationship between research and practice. Urban morphology makes the research on urban growth, urban change in the built environment, questions the roles of the various agents, and it tries to provide ideas for future development. In urban morphology, in the field of urban morphology, there are basically four approaches: spatial analytical, configurational, process typology, and historical geographical. Now, I will continue from the historical geographical approach. Within the historical geographical approach, we can say there are four principles. The researchers are looking to the formative processes by looking to outward growth and fringe belts of the city. Second, they are looking at the transformative processes and internal change within the built environment. Third, they are looking to the agents of change, the roles of different actors. And from this research, the researcher tries to build a bridge between research and practice with the management of urban landscape. Then, in the first phase, the concentration is on fringe belts, which will avail us to identify development periods of the city. Second, in each development period, we can reach to some development cycle within the plots of the built environment, and we can characterize some morphological regions within the built environment. Third, we can question the different aims, aspirations, and motivations of different actors in the city, in the making of urban form, and we can provide some links to planning decisions as a result of our research. Within this, there are some other principles that the built environment, the urban form, is in a continuous complex web of interactions of systematic form complexes. That's to say, the two-dimensionality and the three-dimensionality of urban form is in a continuous relationship within the change of urban form. The other principle is the hierarchical nesting of form complexes and morphological regions, from the smallest cell in the city to the largest one, in order to reach to the entire city. And urban form is subject to continuous adaptation, transformation, and replacement processes through the continuous interventions of diverse agents: adaptation, transformation, and replacement. At the end, there's the replacement process. Let's look at fringe belts for the first phase in order to identify the formative phases and development periods. What is fringe belts? As a definition, Michael Konzen provides this definition. It's a belt-like zone originating from the temporarily stationary or slowly advancing fringe of a town and composed of a characteristic mixture of land use units initially seeking peripheral location. These land uses are industry, institutions, community services, and open spaces. And even there are some large-scale mansions, housing areas within these fringe belt areas. The fringe belt areas surrounds the city in each development period, and it makes us, as you can see in the lower part on the left, it was the fringe belts of Berlin in the beginning of 20th century. There are Louis identified 3 development periods and two distinct fringe belts, inner fringe belt and the middle fringe belt in Berlin, in the city of Berlin. And you can see the first period, development period, is surrounded by the inner fringe belt, and we can identify it in the historical development of the city. And the second one is the second development period of the city that is surrounded by the middle fringe belt. According to Jeremy Whitehead, it is arguably the most important contribution to urban morphology. And I like the definition of park much more than the others, I can say, because there's a sarcastic definition here. Michael Bark says that it is composed of fringe belts, are composed of land uses that are produced by the town, but do not necessarily have to be located within the town. Yes, the origins begin with the study of Berlin by Louis in the beginning of the 20th century in 1936. It was elaborated by M.R.G. Konzen with his studies on British towns, small-scale British towns, and most important example was Elnik. And it was developed by Jeremy Whitehead. And Jeremy Whitehead reached this concept to metropolitan scale in his studies of Newcastle upon Tyneside and Birmingham. On the other hand, M.R.G. Konzen again developed the concept of Burgage series, or we can say plot series. Burgage is special to British towns, but in general, we can say plot series. By looking at the building coverage, he identified the development phases within the plots. Building repletion occurs through filling up the plots with new buildings within the plot. It is the repletive phase. When the plots reach the climax phase, it means that there's no place to new buildings, and it reaches to the maximum level in terms of building coverage. After that, the plots will enter to the recessive phase. They waited for a while. They begin to wait for a while. And after that, the buildings begin to demolish, and they stay for urban follow for new investments and new developments in these plots. And after looking at these transformations in plots, looking at building types, looking at plots, the plot amalgamations and plot divisions, the interplay of these transformation processes, M.R.G. Konzen identified something called morphological regions. He formulated it, as I said, looking at buildings, blocks, plots, and land use of the area. And when he overlapped these layers, he identified different morphological regions that shows us different development periods and development, let's say, transformation periods in the city. And for example, the concept of morphological is very strong when we think it as a tool to link research and practice. It's an example from a suburban settlement of Birmingham, Barnes Green, developed by Jeremy and Susan Whitehead. They make their research on morphological regions of this settlement and identified different morphological regions at different levels of urban development, historical development, and they gave this document to local authority in order to develop some planning decisions to these areas. Different from developing some insensitive planning decisions. Likewise, in Porto, in Portugal, in France, there are some examples of using this concept morphological region in developing planning decisions in also cities of United Kingdom, but they are very rare. We cannot see so much examples of using morphological regions in developing planning decisions. On the other hand, at the third stage, we can look at agents of change. These are the makers of the urban landscape. They might be direct agents like architects, site owners or landowners, consultants, builders and suppliers, or indirect agents like local amenity groups, public and planning officers. Of course, there's a complex web of relationships, but as I mentioned before, I can say that there are some small-scale alliances between them in producing urban form in Turkish cities, especially. But I can say that in general, in many cities in the world, that with the quantitative approach, they are trying to make much more money from urban form or urban space with their small-scale togetherness. From these concepts like fringe belt and morphological region, we can provide some opportunities to make the connection between research and practice in developing planning decisions, we can say. And this diagram is very simple, and it shows that from macro scale to macro scale, micro scale to macro scale, the city runs in a part-to-whole relationship from a historical-geographical perspective, of course. At the lower scale, we have the building, the plot, and we have the plot pattern, building pattern. And at the medium scale, we have the district. When we refer to block and street pattern, the plot series, probably. And at the macro scale, we have the city, the urban growth pattern. And in order to look at urban growth pattern, we have the urban fringe belts for our research, its formation and modification. We can look at urban fringe belt as a morphological unit. And at the medium and lower scales, micro scales, we have the morphological regions or characters areas as the morphological unit for our research. And when we come back to the critics of Hedman and Jasinski, again, we can remember that their critics refers to the lack of part-to-whole relationship within the city that results in the lack of coherent and satisfying patterns of development. Let's look at some pictures for this. For example, the developments and fringe belt areas. Yes, these are pictures from London. The old port city is transformed into a financial center, the docklands, and the character of city, it affects the character of the city. And some other transformations in the region called the city, the central area of London, we can see some new buildings are emerging side by side without any reference to each other. The silhouette of the city is changing, the character of the city is changing. Also, some fringe belt developments in the city of Birmingham, in some older areas of factories, some shopping centers, some conference halls, or something like this. And when we come back to Turkey. This is a very symbolic building in the middle fringe belt of Istanbul. It's a 5-star hotel that was erected in the place of a public park just next to İnönü Stadium. Sorry, not the name of the stadium is Vodafone Park now. Just next to it. Then there was a park next to the stadium area, and they turned this park to this hotel area. Yes, on the left-hand side, you can see that hotel building, but everything began with the building on the right-hand side, the Hilton, the modernist one. This is a very attractive building, in my opinion, of course. It was one of the first modernist buildings in the city, and it was the first 5-star hotel in Turkey and in Istanbul. Also, it was, I think I'm not wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong, it was the first 5-star hotel that was built after Second World War in Europe. And it has a strategic importance for Hilton. It begins with that building because it was erected in the public park. Like the other building in the middle of the picture. Like the other one on the far hand, right hand of the picture. Yes, they are all erected in the public parks. And this public park is a very important park for Istanbul, and it is called İnönü Gezisi, which means that İnönü, the closest friend of Atatürk, walks in this park, and there's a memory in this park for the for Republican Turkey, I think. Yes, some old factory areas are being transformed to office areas. Some stadium areas are transformed into office and residential and mixed-use developments. Yes, some institutional areas are transformed into shopping centers and mixed-use developments. Some forestry areas, in fact, are transformed into residential areas. And everywhere cities began to resemble to each other, as Hedman and Jasenski says. London and Istanbul began to resemble to each other in their silhouette, in their other forms, and in Izmir also, the third largest city in terms of population in Turkey, began to transform into another city. From a Mediterranean city, it is being transformed to something else. What is called world city? I don't know what they are meaning. But everywhere, these kind of buildings are being emerged. In fact, in Mersin, a smaller city in the southern southern coast of Turkey, in Anatolia. It's an important port city historically, but it's a young city. In a period of 1 century, that skyscraper in the center of the color photograph, you can see the first skyscraper of the country, the tallest one in the country, that's erected in the beginning of 1990s. Yes, what should we do? We what should we do in order to link the practice and research? We asked this question in our research in that city, in the city of Mersin. It was transformed from a village to metropolitan city in a century. You can see the development from 1920s to approximately 2020s, approximately. The urban form of the city enlarged too much to the surrounding areas, to agricultural areas, to forestry areas. And it also produced its fringe belts, inner fringe belt, middle fringe belt, and outer fringe belt. And by this way, we can identify the development periods of the city and the relationship between the informal housing areas and the fringe belt areas. But this, in the place of this building, there was a factory, very large scale factory, cotton factory. Yes, Taksim Group hotels, I mean that taller buildings, taller building. We can see that the fringe belts began to be seen as the potential areas for redevelopment. And it began to change the character of the city, and it began to be an example to other taller buildings in the city center. Those taller buildings, for example, were erected after demolishing the older buildings that gave the character to the city, that gave the historical character to the city. Yes, after that, we looked at the transformative processes in the inner city. We took 3 residential areas. The first one jumped over the inner city. The second one jumped over the middle fringe belt, and the third one is developing nowadays with the other fringe belts. They will give us some opinion about development of the city. For example, Çamlıbel district, the first district for the first residential environment that appeared outside the historical city center. Pozcu district, the second residential area that jumped over the middle fringe belt and emerged in a distant place from the city during the 1960s. Yes, when we look at Çamlıbel, the first one, we can see that the plots are densified with the replacement of new buildings. In approximately how many years? 80 years. Yes. And it changed yes, you can see in this period, we can see that the single family houses in the silhouette are replaced by apartment buildings, plot by plot. But how did it happen? When we ask this question after a very detailed investigation on plot by plot investigation, we can say that after accumulation, transformation, and replacement processes, there are, we can say, the certain building types were produced in each period and in each phase. You remember the institutive phase, repletive phase, and climax phase within the plots. Now, in this slide, in 2015 or today, we can say that Çamlıbel district, the plots of Çamlıbel district reached to its climax phase. There's no place to new buildings in the plots. That means that it will stay until the buildings begin to be demolished. we must think, what should we do in this? What should we develop in order to redevelop this environment? Because we can say that it will wait for a while. But some actors in the market will come and market mechanisms will run, and we will see that some denser and taller buildings will replace the older ones. The historical period says us that. In the institutive phase, there were the single-family houses, you can say. In the second phase, repetitive phase, a 4 or 5 story apartment building was erected inside the plot, just behind the single-family house, and in the third phase, another apartment building replaced the single-family houses that was emerged in the beginning of the plot. But if the second phase did not happen, the plot may jump directly to the climax phase, and the single-family house may be replaced with a taller building. The density of building is actually equal to the other 2 buildings within the plot, the sum of the 2 other buildings. But the composition of the plot changes. I will come to this point later. Okay. We can see some different plots emerge during this 80 years. T1 is the parent plot here. It is divided into T2, and then T2s may be divided into T2-1 or something else, or they might be amalgamated in order to produce T3, or T1s might be directly amalgamated in order to reach to T4. Or if there will be no development in T4, there will be further divisions in T4 in order to reach T5s. And when we overlap this development with the replacement of buildings, we can develop some morphogenetic types. We call morphogenetic types here. When we look at the interplay of building replacement processes and plot transformation processes. Here, these 4 pictures can say something about these phases. The left-hand side, upper left-hand side, you can see the first phase, institutive phase. The built environment was composed of single-family houses, and in the second phase, some apartment blocks begin to appear within the plots just behind the single-family houses. And after that, apartment blocks begin to appear with the place of those single-family houses at the plot heads. You can see a taller building in the 4th picture on the lower right-hand side. This refers to the plot. This refers to transformation of the single-family house directly to a taller building within the plot. That means that, for example, when you look at left-hand or right-hand side of that taller building, there were 2 buildings within the plot. But here, there is 1 building. And the building density, the total construction area equals to one construction area of the taller building equals to the sum of the other 2 buildings on the other plots. And this means that the production of built environment is changing, the way of production. Why? We will see it. Yes, And yes, these numbers show us the increase in the building coverage and floor area ratio within the plots. Building coverage increased from approximately 33% to 77%, while the floor area ratio reached to 50%, from 50% to 3.56, something like this. And this is a huge increase within the built environment. This is the result of quantitative approach. This is the result of looking for exchange value. This is the result of small-scale alliances within the plots. We will look at the result later in more detail. In the other region, in Pozcu region, yes, the beginning was with some cooperative housing in 1955, with the production of single-family houses in larger plots, and it began to be transformed into apartment blocks within the same plots, within the plots that were designed for single-family houses. Then the composition of the built environment changed inevitably. And today, although there are some examples of single-family houses, one or two, you can see the whole environment turned into a building environment consisting of apartment blocks. This means that without changing here, the important thing is here, the plots did not change here because they are large enough. But we will see that although they are large enough, still the apartment blocks are too large. Their footprints are too large. Their building coverage, the numbers of the building coverage are too much instead. Yes, the silhouette of this area is changing. Yes, the single family houses in the beginning and their replacement with the apartment blocks. Today's result is something like this. It's of course the streets are full of automobiles. Why? Because there's no parking places in the plots. And think about this. There was one family in one plot, and now think about the other buildings. Approximately, when we think in an optimistic way, there are almost 15 or 16 families in one plot. And there were some parking places within the plots for cars. Now, there is no place for cars within the plot. And car ownership is increasing. What should they do? This is the same in Çamlıbel and Pozcu. The result is the densification of plots, higher building coverage, increasing building heights, and insufficient supply of infrastructure. No parking place for cars, no parks for children, no sufficient schools for children. What should they do? Yes, market gave the answer to this question. And this is the urban form they produce. Look at this. Yes, this one. In many cities in Turkey, also we can see this kind of development in many European cities. I saw in many European cities similar developments in the surrounding areas of the city. The agricultural lands begin to be open to new developments. What kind of a development is this? Yes, let's look at some numbers. And the drawings at the lower side shows us the hypothetical, the results of this hypothetical results within the plots of this discussion. Çamlıbel, look at this, the first region, the first residential environment. Look at the first plot and the third plot. Look at the transformation. Look at the densification. In Pozcu, it has two faces, and the densification is less than Çamlıbel, but we will see that it is not enough for having enough infrastructure within the environment. When we think within the quantitative approach. And North Mersin, the third area, the plot is this. At the bottom of the slide, you will see. Yes, I put 3 buildings there, but it might be 1 building also, because there's no any regulation that the about number of buildings, their heights. There's only a regulation about their density, construction area. Yes, there might be 1 building, 3 buildings, 4 buildings, 10 buildings. Who knows? It depends on the design of architects. Then there is the static urban pattern in Çamlıbel and Pozcu. It brought about some problems about livability and sustainability of urban environment, but the development in North Mersin, is it the answer to that problems? This is the indistinct urban pattern. We cannot identify what kind of an urban pattern is this. And we ask the question between the research and what is the relation between research and practice here? What is the influence of practice here? And we looked at urban plans in Turkey, that's called imar planı. The construction facilities are directed by these plans, as it is in all around the world, especially in Europe. Turkey is also a member of Napoleonic family, which originated from France. The regulations are very similar with France, for example, with Italy, for example. Here, that we can say there are 3 basic regulations within urban plans. This is regulation by bylaws. Here, there is no planning decision, but this type of presentation in plans means that decisions about construction will be taken with reference to the existing built environment. Building heights are determined with reference to the width of streets. When we look at Istanbul Development Bylaw in 1948, for example, when the street width is 9 meters, the building height will be 2 stories. And it was increasing to the street, when the street width is much larger than 20 meters, the building height will be 6 stories. But after a change in 1956 in development bylaw, we can see that 1 story was added to all these street widths. When the street width is 9 meters, the building height will be 3 stories here. Then you can see it was 2 story. Then something began to change in urban built environment. And the second one is the plans that's concentrated on regulation by standards. You can see here the building types, number of stories. I mean the building types. The A stands for detached building, B stands for attached building, BL stands for semi-detached housing. And you can see some setbacks and number of stories. For example, Çamlıbel was shaped by regulations by law. The densification is much more than post-Jew area you see. In post-Jew, in the third phase, there was regulation by standards. They begin to have much control on built environment. But although the regulations were saying that, for example, the front setback in by-law areas would be at least 5 meters, it is 1.2 in Çamlıbel areas. Although the rear setback is approximately 6 meters, the rear setback is less than 3 meters, you will see, in Çamlıbel. In post-Jew, it is better. Okay, the front setback is 4 meters and the rear setback is 4 meters also. Then we produce the regulation. We aim to make the control on built environment in order to have sustainable and livable urban space, but the practice shows that they cannot be controlled. And the problems, as I said before, there is the static urban built environment in both cases. On the left-hand side, you can see the built environment of Çamlıbel, very dense, and in post-Jew, less dense, okay, but still dense. Look at those plots. There are only buildings within the plots, nothing more. There are over-prescriptive rules with the quantitative understanding here. They are focusing on production of single buildings, and there's a strict control on morphological elements such as building height, setbacks, etc., etc. But there is the gradual repletion and replacement processes that are facilitated by planning decisions. They increase the building heights, they increase the floor area ratio of those plots, and day by day, new denser buildings emerge in urban built environment. Then there is no search for coherent wholeness, no regard for a process of change, no suggestion for a framework for change. And as I said, that the result was some problems about the living conditions. No sufficient places for children, no sufficient places for cars, no sufficient places for sun, no sufficient places for wind. And market mechanism produced a new type of plan that is focused on regulation by FAR, floor area ratio. Then here, building types are set free here within the plot. Even the shape and area of blocks are open to new interpretations on modifications. Almost there is no control on morphological elements because there is the control on total construction area because there's only floor area ratio. Here, E refers to floor area ratio on plan. There's nothing more you can see. Only there is setback 5 meters. But we don't know what will be seen in this plot. 1 building, 5 buildings, 10 buildings. About their heights, we don't know anything. And it gave rise to emergence of campus-type housing estates. And the pictures shows us the indistinct urban pattern that emerged with the use of regulation by FAR in new development areas of the city. Regulation by bylaws, regulation by standards, and regulation by FAR. And what is look at this. And you can see the relationship between the development plans, urban plans, and emergence of different urban built environments. Here, I know I talk too much. Alessandro, but I'm coming to the conclusion. We can see that in practice, inherited forms have very little influence on production of new forms. Every professional tries to make his or her own ideals, own expectations, realize their own expectations. Urban development plans are used to direct the replacement processes, especially in the built environments. And they became the tools of replacement. And this phrase is, I think, very important. The result, we can say, we can summarize the result that with that phrase, form follows finance. Form follows finance, because all these building types, we can see the transformation in the built environment were directed by market mechanisms, in which the strongest actors were constructors. And by this way, we can also say that the link between research and practice is so weak. And the practitioners know very little about the substance of the object they are dealing with. Yes, the plot of Çamlıbel, the plot of Pozcu, and the plot of Kuzey Mersin, North Mersin. The scale of these plots are the same, by the way. There's no change, there's no exaggeration here. The plot, the scale is the same, and here we must question ourselves about the relationship between planning, architecture, and design in the development of urban built environment. We can question the actors, their actions, and we can question ourselves what kind of a general comprehension we have on urban space production, quantitative or qualitative. And what is our conceptualization about urban space? Do we prioritize use value or exchange value? And should we see the city as project or city as process? We must choose among them. This is also very simplified, of course, but in a simplified way, we must choose among them, while producing something in our built environment. Yes, thank you very much for listening to me. I spoke too much, I think. Alessandro, thank you very much.
Thank you. Since we're a little bit, but
yes,
one point here is essential. What should we do to fill the gap between research and practice?
Yes.
And I can tell you what we do, Hocam. We run a studio, a design studio, which is based on the teachings of urban morphology.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Hello, everybody.
And this is what we do to, fill the gap between research and practice. Having said so, let's see if we have any questions from the audience, both in the classroom and at home on Zoom.
No one?
Any comments or questions? I do have a comment, but I'm holding that for later.
Yeah.
No, I'm now eventually talking to my students. You see, this is very important. What we do in the studio, we're doing a process-based design, exactly what Tolga said, process rather than object. We're doing a project which is bridging research and practice, urban morphology, building typology, and design. So we're following the footsteps of Tolga Ünlü hocam in our studio. Now, this is my personal comment. This issue of the evolution of the building into an object that begins with the modern movement, I would say, and extends after the Second War, to the point that buildings look like pieces of vegetables, or buildings tend to become objects. Now, this phenomenon has a name. In German, it's called Verdienglichung. Karl Marx introduces the word Verdienglichung in the third book of Das Kapital, which translates in English as reification. That's a very complicated word as well. Basically, the transformation of every production factor into product. So, in Verdienglichung is for Karl Marx, the person in capitalism has no value. He is a product, not anymore an individual.
Yes.
Now, the same thing happens for buildings. Buildings are product. There are no individual meaning, relationship, role, in buildings in late capitalism. Now, in order to understand this evolution, the transformation of everything into products, including people and buildings, I would like to discuss the difference between an object and a person. So an object, let's take this one, a ruler, has no relationship. You can move it anywhere, in space. It does not have daughters, mothers, grandfathers. It does not own a dog. Whereas a person has a father, a mother, sometimes children, was born in one place, then worked, graduated. It has relationships with other people. Now, what does this have to do with buildings? Yes, it does have to do with buildings, because buildings are born in places like the people. They have ancestors like the people, grandfathers, grandmothers. They can generate children. They can evolve into something else. Moreover, they have a relationship with other buildings, just like people. So you can have a neighbor, and a building can have a neighbor. You can have a grandfather, a building can have a grandfather. So in a way, getting back to the idea of the building as an individual, not as an object, can help us to design better buildings. That's my comment. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. You summarize everything. Yes, what Marx says, reification is a part of alienation, of course. Alienation, we are all alienated in our built environments. The basic problem is this, because as Alessandro says, the built environment is produced as a product in order to sell from someone to other one, not for living. Then we must think about how to produce our environment as a living place. You see, the United Nations are talking about sustainability, livability, something else. But what are they doing? They are doing nothing, I can say. Okay, they are trying to cover the reality of the economic system by saying this. Then, yes, let's do. What is sustainable environment, livable environment? Let's think about this. They are not thinking about this. We must think about this, and urban morphology can help to think about this. In our example, especially, urban morphology helped to show what a sustainable or livable environment cannot be. Okay, then of course everything is changing. The buildings will change, but the problem is here. The buildings. Please think about our example. The plot, in the initial phase, institutive phase, we have a plot. We had a plot for single family house. But at the end, there is almost no change in the dimensions of this plot, but we have an apartment block. In Çamlıbel residential environment, it was more than 5-story. In Pozcu, it was 5-story, and in North Mersin, it was indistinct. And the problem is that we could not provide a framework for change. If we could not provide a framework for change, the change will be directed by the economic system, the strong actors. They will look at the built environment and they will say that, oh yes, there's a single family house here to be demolished, and it will be a very suitable plot for apartment blocks. And then if only one person make this, the others will follow it, him or her. Okay? And the case that we investigated developed like this. In the beginning, there was only one apartment block. At the end, the whole environment is full of apartment blocks. Okay, we must control this, and we must provide the framework for change. But of course, on the other hand, we are not gods or something like that. We have limited power. But we must always warn the planning authorities, we must always warn the practitioners about the built environment they are producing. About the built environment, they are alienating ourselves to our living spaces. Okay, because as I said in my presentation, it's a repetition, of course, but I must repeat it. Architects try to make very successful, beautiful buildings, very beautiful buildings. For example, when, of course, Alessandro, probably you know about the hotel building in Antakya, the Museum Hotel. Do you know this? This is a very beautiful building, for example.
We don't, we know, we have a case study here, I think.
Oh, yes. Well, what's your opinion about that building as an architect? I have some opinions about as a planner, but what is your opinion?
Not good. Not good, not bad. That's...
I think the building is very successful in its design. Very successful. I'm so impressed by the building. But the building is on Roman Forum. On Roman Forum. How can you do this? You use...
Yeah, it's about relationship. It does not have a strong relationship with the substratum, what is below the building. It's not, it's an object on top of...
Yes, of course, of course. You are...
Show the boiler, we can say.
You cannot do this. If we are talking about use value of built environment, if we are talking about finding some answers to the problem of alienation, you cannot do this. We must be aware of this. Okay, this is the inherited form from the historical development of the city. Of course, we must be aware of these inherited forms, but we must develop new forms. We must design new forms from that inherited forms, but also having some respect to the basic structure of the city.
So students, do you understand why we're doing the Ottoman palace before the modern building? You understand the logic that there is? So sorry, because our studio is following this idea exactly. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You are studying in the built environment. Yeah. I think, on the other hand, I think our one of our main problems is producing new forms in newly developing areas of the city. Because the new forms are separated from the old forms of the city. Especially by the help of using that regulation by floor area ratio. Not only in Turkey, but also in other parts of the European cities. I can see this. I can see transformation of fringe belt areas into something like shopping areas, mixed use development, something. We must raise our sounds in order to warn those authorities and practitioners, I think, about the historical development of the city, about the inherited forms of the city, and we must encourage, especially the authorities, local authorities, to seek for new designs linked to inherited forms in the developing areas of the city. Yeah, I don't know, I'm clear, but.
Thank you very much. I think we can now stop the recording.